My name is Corey Hulen. I'm co-founder and CTO of a company called Mattermost. I'm going to talk about lessons learned implementing ChatOps, or what's DevOps plus messaging. What is ChatOps? This is a question I get asked a lot. There's a lot of different answers to it. The one that I like the best is this definition. Not sure where I stole it from, but it's ChatOps is a collaborative, conversation-centric way of working that brings people, discussions, bots, tools, and files together in one central location. So that's all it is. A lot of people think it's a lot of different things. It is a lot of different things. For me, it's more a methodology than a technology. And you'll hear me kind of repeat that over and over again. So what this talk is really about is sort of if you're an organization that's newer to ChatOps, how does ChatOps come into an organization? What does it look like? What are the steps getting there? I'll kind of walk through 6 or 7 steps, and I'll share some examples of customers and some examples of Mattermost itself. First, what are some of the benefits of ChatOps? I think some of the really big benefits are mean time to restore drops dramatically. So if you're managing an incident or having an outage, it shortens that feedback loop. It gives you that faster response time. Some of the other really cool stuff is it's a shared console or shared command line. When you're doing ChatOps, you're basically having everyone in the same channel. You see all that history. It gives you that sort of shared command line experience, and that can make you move a lot faster in an organization. It typically has all the required people in one place. So it's really easy to mix people with technology or structured data with unstructured data. And last but not least, once again, it's a methodology, not a technology. It's about how your organization deals with incidences or other types of scenarios, but it's about how your organization deals with those and how it brings that technology together with people. So that's structured data, data coming from whether it be log, InfoSec analysis tools, with that unstructured, what I call unstructured data, or just those humans being in a channel. In an ideal world, this is what ChatOps looks like. You have your team of people off to the left. These will be your SRE people, your support people, your DevOps, your engineers. They're usually interacting with some kind of messaging tool. Pick your messaging tool of choice. We're Mattermost, we're an open source enterprise messaging tool. There's a lot of other great ones out there, but obviously this talk's going to talk maybe a little bit about us more than others. So you have your team. And one of the key things about the messaging tool, it really needs to be channel-based or topic-based messaging. It's one of those tools or messaging tools where it's really focused around those channels or topics. Then you're integrating with usually lots of bots, bots in terms of things like QBots, or even other style stuff like slash commands or webhooks. And then you have those bots and slash commands and webhooks interacting with your infrastructure. And that's really what it boils down to. It's your team of people interacting with your chatter messaging-based system, that chatter messaging-based system interacting with either bots or slash commands that's interacting or pulling data out of your infrastructure. Sometimes it's pulling data out of your infrastructure, sometimes it's issuing commands to your infrastructure, but it's about doing it all through that common messaging interface. And we'll talk about some of the benefits of why to do that. Kind of footnote, reality, not all of them are as sophisticated as this, but even small steps in this sort of getting to a ChatOps world can really add a lot of value. So that's great, but how do we get there? I always start with people I talk about it in different steps. I think I have 7 of them. The first one is sort of start small and do it manually. It's sort of the easiest one to understand. Really ask yourself some simple questions like, are you a chat-based organization today? If not, then choose a persistent messaging platform. Use that as your sort of command center for how your organization operates, and start there. So you just start by getting all of your humans sort of into channels. You get that sort of channel-based communication kind of going in your organization, right? And it's a very different type of communication compared to things like email or other stuff you may have done. It gives you, some really big benefits. It's the shared screen. I'll call it the shared command line, a lot of different things. I think of it as like playing a cooperative board game. You kind of got all your good thinkers all in the same room, all playing a board game or trying to win together. And that key is having them in that same channel, having them in that same room. It captures the history of everything that's been tried before. So having that shared command line or that shared history is a really important aspect of it, because you get really smart people coming in, seeing where others have left off and making different decisions based on that. Don't be afraid to over-add people to start. I always tell people, when you're starting with a sort of a chat-based system or a channel-based system, it's always better to have more people in the system than less. They'll self-filter, and having a lot of smart people in the room always solves the problem faster. And it's sort of this last piece is where you find a lot of value, right? Your team as a whole typically has a lot of esoteric knowledge that can be valuable while you're troubleshooting, right? In the sense that someone in your team probably has seen that problem before, or a similar problem, and knows a good place to start poking. So the more people you can expose to this, the better it is. Expose, within the confines of whatever your organization is, whether they have access to see that data, whether they have the security requirements to see that data, whatever it is. But we always start with telling people it's better to over-include than to under-include. Because what that really helps, that esoteric knowledge really helps shorten that time to response, that time to fix the issue. So here's a great example. This is a manual example of us. All of these examples are based on our community server. So Mattermost is an open source project. We run our own community server called community.mattermost.com. 6,000 community members sit there with over 100 of our staff members. So it's a really interesting environment where there's some core staff members who have certain privileges, and then there's a community of 6,000 people who have different privileges. So here's a very manual example of sort of, just a chat-based system. And it starts with someone from my team. You can't see it, but up above, somebody posted in a screenshot saying, hey, they're having a problem. Screenshot's a great way to get started. Next response is from somebody from my team saying like, hey, it'd be really great if you could actually post the actual error message. So here's just an example of some rich text formatting of the actual error messages. This is just kind of the first step, right? Getting everyone into a chat-based system, having those conversations sort of take place. Then you kind of get to the second step. The second step is you start automating the simple things. You don't need to start with the uber powerful bot or slash commands that solve everything. You just want to get simple alerting into the system, right? So you have your, whatever the kinds of tools they are, whether it's an InfoSec tool, a CloudWatch tool, a simple notification service tool that's alerting based on something. You just want to start pumping those alerts into your chat-based or channel-based system. You want to start creating specific channels around those different types of alerts. Some examples are security, performance, build system, war rooms, and you just want to use simple webhooks to get started. That's the easiest way to do it. And then watch your team cooperatively respond to those alerts and outages, right? How often, we find this a lot in organizations that we deal with in our customer base and our user base, especially when you get to larger organizations, organizations that build a lot of microservices. You end up in a situation where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, right? So by giving them the structured data coming from alerts and stuff like that, with the unstructured data that's coming from humans, and putting them all in the same channel, is where the real power really starts to begin. So here's a very simple example. This is our own example again. We have an alert that fires from, I think this is coming from simple notification services in AWS. It's basically saying we have a high CPU utilization in one of our systems. Carlos recognizes that it's actually from our LDAP system, and so he mentions Martin. Martin's not actually in the channel. It tells him he's not in the channel, so he goes ahead and quickly adds Martin to the channel. And then you see Martin respond with, yeah, I'm doing a lot of requests right now. So what Martin's actually doing is he's running a load test against our LDAP server, and that's what caused the alert. And so this is just a great way to get the information readily accessible to different people. Here's a great example where the engineer doesn't necessarily have access to the alert and wouldn't have necessarily seen the alert in an email or whatever. But because it's getting piped into our messaging system, one of our SRE people or one of our DevOps people can easily add the right person into the channel if they're not already there and say like, hey, what is this? What's going on? Can you look into more detail on this? And so that's kind of just that first step, right? Is bringing in those logs into your chat-based system. Step 3. So you kind of take it up a next level. You want to try to start to automate the harder things. So this is where we start looking at advanced slash commands or a lot more advanced alerting style hooks. This is where we start looking at the data itself as well. So, screenshots are always nice, they're quick and easy, but we're talking about bringing in richer types of data as well. So I'll show you some of these examples as well. But things like markdown tables, file attachments for logs, or even utilizing a bunch of the markdown formatting or different types of formatting in your messaging system. So it's about bringing back that really rich information. It's about bringing it back to a user and presenting it to them in a way that they can readily and quickly identify what the problem is they're having and go deal with the incident itself. So here's an example that we use some rich markdown table formatting for. We have load tests that run. We have a bot called Matterbuild or /command called Matterbuild that you can issue a command saying like, hey, go run a load test. You do /Matterbuild load test. It goes, fires up a whole array of machines. It runs a load test for, 15, 20 minutes. When the load test is completed, it posts back into the channel. Here's the load test results. And just having sort of that automation set up and then bringing that data back in a really rich way can really help with your sort of incident and diagnosing that incident and responding to the incident. Another example is just some attaching files or structured files that render in certain ways. So here's a great example of, we have our JIRA bot. There's a bug filed. I'm actually attaching the Nginx logs for that bug. And what's really cool about this is when you kick the Nginx logs, you can see them right there in line. And we have a lot of people on our team who have a lot more experience at debugging Nginx than I do. And so they'll be able to readily look through that and realize like, oh, we think this is the issue that's causing this bug or causing this outage. And so just being able to bring back logs and stuff like that and attach them to the sort of the channel history can be a very powerful, simple concept. Step 4. So this is where you start automating what we call automating command and control. So you can start off with simple things like outgoing webhooks or / commands. So in Mattermost, all of our webhooks and / commands are binary level compatible with Slack. So if it works in Slack, it just works in Mattermost. It's a really great way to get started. You start to automate the things that your teammates are constantly bugging you for. So we'll kind of go through that different process as well, but a lot of people start off with / commands. They're really easy to understand. You can kind of think of them almost like command line, command line commands, but you're just doing it from chat instead. So we start adding. How we do it internally is we start with different sort of / command tool sets. We start adding more and more / command tool sets to those. And then we start automating the things that you realize your audience is requesting. So if you have a bunch of DevOps or QA people and they start constantly bugging one of your internal infrastructure teams like, hey, we really like to see this type of information, it's one of the best ones to sort of start adding to your sort of command and control set, right? And sort of the key here is you want to allow for that self-provisioning by almost anyone, right? And I'll talk about an example of how we see this happen, which is we have an incident going on or outage going on. You have a bunch of people in the room who are issuing different types of commands, right? Commands to bring back logs, commands to do more investigation or bring back analytics. And what ends up happening is your engineers in the room or your knowledgeable people in the room start training your non-engineers in the room, right? In the sense that they'll see these engineers issuing these different types of commands to bring back Grafana logs, right? And they'll start training your support organization, especially like your tier 1 support or level 1 support, that they'll start seeing, hey, this is the information that people down the line need. And because it's self-provision or because most anybody can do it, they'll start proactively doing that. And we see that in our organization all the time, and we see that from our customer base as well. When we start talking about customers doing this at scale, that's one of the most interesting things for them is, you start building this command and control center, you start adding commands to it, and you kind of trust the automation to keep you on the rails, right? So you want this system that's sort of flexible, but also guarded in the sense that it really can't screw up your system, or it does stuff to your system in an idempotent way where you can run it again, it doesn't really matter, or it's just pulling back data. And so that way you can start pushing a lot of this type of self-provisioning down to a lower level in your organization. So your support people can do it, your QA people can start doing it. They can start running the commands or issuing the commands that you might, as an engineer, want to see farther down the road for the incident. And so it becomes really interesting in that sense. So some different examples of how we use it internally. We use it to set up ad hoc testing environments. I just showed you one of load testing environment. We use it for bringing back querying details around analytics. We also use it to push production. So all of our automate deploys to production. So one of the really nice things about doing it through a ChatOps style interface is it gives you this nice history of what went wrong, right? You have all these automated commands of what's being pushed, and it's being pushed back into a chat-based system or a channel-based system. Anyone from your engineering org can see what type of deploy is going on at what time into what environment. And so that can be very powerful as well. So in our example, we talk about something called Matterbuild. So here's a great example. It's a slash command. So here's an example of Carlos issuing a Matterbuild command. He wants to cut 5.5 RC1 candidate. It immediately echoes back in the channel. It's beginning the cut of this release. And it actually echoes in another public channel in the Mattermost release channel, like, hey, a build is starting. So he might be the only one in a particular build channel, but there's a lot more people or other engineers or people in a release channel. So here's an example of a slash command, echoing back into two places. And what happens here is it goes off and it integrates with our CI/CD system. It kicks off a whole build. It runs a whole build process, runs a whole bunch of automation to make sure that test for that build process is complete. And then when it finishes, it actually echoes back in the release channel like, hey, the build's done. Here's the link where you can go download it. Here's a test server I've already spun up with that build running on it. And here's a whole bunch of SHA or hashes if you want to go download it and verify the build or whatever. And so that's how we use it, integrated into our CI/CD system. Here's some examples of what our Matterbuild command can do. So if you say like /Matterbuild help, here's all the different things that ours can do. And so it can do a lot of different stuff. It can cut builds. It can run load tests. It does a lot with our translation server. So we're localized into 16 different languages. Like I said, we have this community of 6,000 contributors who help us out. A lot of them, not a lot, but several of them help out with things like translation. And so they're allowed to run certain commands to help set up the translation system into a point where it can build. We can do merge requests from here. We can run specific jobs. We can even look at certain configurations in our environment. And so it becomes a really interesting way for not only our staff, but our community to interact with our system, right? And you can secure it at a lot of different levels. People secure it different ways. You can secure these things through things like just natural channel membership. So if the person has access to this channel, they have access to these commands. Our system is actually secured a little bit more than that in the sense that the Matterbuild system itself knows individual users who can run these commands. So anyone can join our community server. Anyone in this room can go join it. You can try to issue some of these commands, and it'll probably tell you don't have permission to do it, or at least I hope it would. So as an example, only certain people have the power to cut a release build, stuff like that. And so we end up seeing organizations kind of at those two different levels building in some permissions into these types of things. And that's a great way to do it in the sense that our recommendation always is just to follow the channel permission. So if you're in the channel, because you have access to the channel, you have access to that information, you should have access to run these slash commands. When you have slash commands or ChatOps commands that go across channels, then you start building a more richer permission-based system on top of that. Yep.
So earlier when Carlos added Martin to the channel,
yep,
did that give him rights to do stuff?
Yeah, so exactly. So when he was added to that channel, it gave him some basic rights to issue commands within that channel. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. And that's usually the easiest because, like I said, in most channel-based systems, chat-based systems, you have team hierarchy, channel hierarchy. Those have implicit permissions, and so it's really easy just to piggyback on those permissions. When you do get more detailed, like in the case of Matterbuild, since it goes across several channels, we do start building permissions into the actual system itself. So one of the cool things about our system is we actually pass the permissions along. So when we call this, you can build a slash command in such a way where it gets access to who's actually calling it, and you can verify that yourself and figure out, is this person in this group, and then if so, allow that command to execute. Step 5, so this is where you really start kind of crossing that. I consider all this ChatOps, but this is where I think a lot of people start really considering it ChatOps, when you start crossing into that bot world. And I think it's a really great way to sort of add that human interface. onto that chat-based system, right? So you kind of take all those previous steps that you've done and you start converting it to a more human interface. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time remembering slash commands and stuff like that. So it's really great to start adding it to something like a HuBot or something where you can start asking it questions, or it's a little more conversational or interactive, or it's a more helpful style bot. I always like to tell people, give it some character, make it fun. You know, if you make it angry or overly happy, it humanizes it for a large audience. It also gives you someone to blame. You know, the angry bot did it, not me. So it kind of takes that piece out of it. And you can start using existing interfaces today like HuBot. So HuBot's a great example where it already has a whole bunch of command and control for things like Jenkins, the ability to show various log servers, show Grafana reports, and all that kind of stuff. We don't have a whole lot of HuBot examples in Mattermost, but we know a lot of customers who use them, who use it. So here's a simple example. HuBot lets ship it. It echoes back the ship it squirrel. Step 6, so this is an optional step, and it's building rich plugins. So it's utilizing a rich plugin framework to build deep integrations. Mattermost is very unique in the sense we allow you to build really rich plugins that take over the UI on the front end or have really a lot of back-end extension mechanisms. For example, we allow you to intercept messages, which is a really cool ability to intercept the message before it goes into the system of record, before it goes into the database, so you can modify the message. We also allow you to intercept the message afterwards, so if you want to rebroadcast it. We also allow you to do that on the front end, which becomes very unique or interesting, where if you can rewrite the message on the front end, I can rewrite the message differently for different individuals. So if you have different permissions than this person, you might see a message that has an extra hyperlink or two in it, stuff like that. So it becomes a very powerful concept of being able to overwrite messages. You can also just think of it in terms of data loss prevention and stuff like that. You don't want to type in a social security number or something that looks like a password in your system or a security key in your system. Because you can intercept the message before it gets into the system of record, you can actually detect that, say like, hey, that looks like a security key in our system, and you can overwrite it into something else. Or even send a second alert like, hey, looks like Corey just pasted a security key in here. Did you really want him? Did you, do you want to go chat with him? And did he really mean to do that? So here's some examples of some rich integrations in our system. Here's a GitHub example. So this is actually a GitHub bot. It's telling me I have one unread message. But one of the really cool things is it actually, if you know anything about sort of chat systems, it actually takes over the team sidebar area. So it actually puts in this extra little bit of UI in here. And in there, I can tell what my open pull requests are. I think that's my open forks, messages, or that's messages. I forget all of them are. But here's a really great example of a really rich bidirectional plugin. So it's not only taking over pieces of the UI and adding information. It's actually bidirectional as well. It means that something is updated in GitHub, it gets updated here, or vice versa. This becomes really powerful with different things. Oh wait, there's a different example. So here's another one where the GitHub integration just actually appends to a pop-up card, the person's GitHub profile link, so when I click on it. But this kind of leads into some other really powerful ones. So here's an example of our JIRA integration. So one of the cool things about JIRA is it's bidirectional. We try to build a lot of our plugins in this bidirectional sense. It really helps, especially when you start talking about this incident response world. And I can go into some examples from our customers where it becomes really powerful. JIRA, for one, is really powerful that we use, obviously, but it allows you to do a couple different things. So here's an example where our JIRA plugin allows you to override the drop-down menu. So if you notice, it's created this extra button called Create JIRA Issue. And then when you click it, it actually brings up a custom dialog. It fills in all the information for JIRA. And when I click Create, it creates the ticket in JIRA, and it also posts a message back into Mattermost. And those messages are bidirectional, meaning if something changes in JIRA, it's reflected in Mattermost, and if I change something in Mattermost, it's reflected in JIRA. And so we see a lot of our customers building their own long tail integrations. So probably the best example of one is we have a customer who built a lot of incident response or incident management stuff around InfoSec. So they have this InfoSec analysis tool that's out there reading their logs. It's pumping messages into Mattermost. When they have an alert, it actually pumps message into Mattermost. It creates a channel, pumps a message into Mattermost, assigns the right security researchers. But then it does a whole bunch of interesting information with the information it posts in there. So as an example, it'll post in things like IP addresses, and it'll have suspected IP addresses of like this person's doing a DDoS attack. And they actually rewrite the message so that the IP address is a hyperlink that takes over the right-hand sidebar. So they have the message in channel where their security researchers are talking about it. In the if you click on the IP address in the right-hand sidebar, you can get a lot of detailed information from that IP address from one of their internal systems. You can also click from there and go into their external, into their legacy system or internal system and get a lot more information. But it's a really quick way for their security researchers to sort of see what's going on, see what the alert's about. They need to diagnose right away. I mean, it's a large, one of the top 5 banks in the world. Their nation state style, attack for targets, right? They need to know right away within seconds or minutes, is this a real alert, or is this just a false positive that we can safely ignore? And so just having that information at their fingertips really drives down that sort of reaction time. Instead of having to go get into all these other different source systems, bring different people in the room, having them right there in the channel with access to information is a really powerful concept. Step 7, I joke about this step. I like to call it bot Nirvana. So we see some of our customers that generate more than 50% of their traffic from bots. That's a crazy, insane number. We have some customers who are doing more than 1 million messages a day. So that's more than 500,000 messages coming from a bot. They use these in a lot of different ways. Probably the more interesting ones that I've seen are customers using it as a war room. And I like to joke about it. It's like reading the Matrix. When the war room is when these are really large customers, when they're having an outage, the war room is going crazy. It's going crazy with all these bots. Sometimes it's more than 20 messages a second going across the screen. And at that fast, a human cannot read them anymore. So I like to joke about it. It's kind of like, how's this even valuable? Why are you guys doing this? What value do you get out of this? But for them, it's really interesting because it's essential. You can start thinking about it as they're using Mattermost at that point as like an app backplane. They have these bots pumping messages into channels. They have other bots that are pulling messages out into other channels, keying off certain keywords. They have then humans that are interacting with those messages, figuring out, diagnosing what the issue is, and then they have them putting them back into like the war room as a sort of closed loop system or whatever. And so it's really interesting to watch these people. I wouldn't necessarily encourage anyone to go build a system like that, but it's fun to see how people, they organically grow over time, and before you know it, you have several million messages a day. And like I said, more than half of them are coming from bots. We have another customer that I think it's something like 80% of their messages come from bots, and it's a single bot and 2 single channels, and it's over 1 million messages a day. And so and it's one of those things you try to back it out for them, like, well, how is this valuable? And they're like, well, we don't know how it's valuable, but we know if we turn it off, there's these 10 other teams that complain about it or whatever. And so you get to that size of an organization where it goes back to that your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing, but by putting it in a central place where you can mix sort of structured data coming from logs and stuff like that with unstructured data coming from humans, is that sort of really powerful concept at the end of the day. And it's just really interesting to see these things, like I said, where they're using it like a message or app backplane at that point. That's it. Questions? Yep.
One perhaps strange question. So I talked to your folks on the 3rd floor, and they mentioned that there is essentially a bridge that you can build between this and Slack. So let's say you have a team within your organization that wants to use Mattermost, but the organization as a whole uses Slack, and you don't want to try to sell, hey, let's do this massive shift. Let's just try it within this 2-pizza team.
Yep.
Can an individual who is essentially testing this out, can they sort of use Mattermost, connect it to Slack, and use it as their command center for?
Yes. Yeah, they could. So we have a tool called Matterbridge. It bridges to a lot of these different messaging systems. Slack being one of those, IRC being another. It bridges to a lot of different ones, and so you can have your own Mattermost server. You can install Matterbridge, and that'll bridge between these different systems. So yep. And we do see people doing that, whether it be Slack or some other messaging system they rolled out enterprise wide. but your DevOps team or your SRE team or your developers really want something that's sort of geared towards them, focused on them, allows them that sort of high flexibility or autonomy and speed. We see that happening as well. So they'll go install this, they'll start using Mattermost in that part of the organization, and they'll bridge it into other messaging systems. Other questions? Yep, no, go for it.
So you mentioned, when you get people on, it's better to over-add people than to leave them out and they discover, oh, there's this thing I should have been watching. As the organization starts to use whatever chat tool or get to using a tool, I'm probably going to refer to Slack because that's what I'm familiar with. A challenge can be, the organization develops institutional knowledge that's sort of implicit about here's what you should join, here's the places where useful knowledge gets placed, and here's the places you should be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
A new person comes in, there's a lot of channels. Some of them are, have names that look pretty meaningful, but then they go and, oh, it's actually dead. And has been for, 3 years and never got cleaned up. How can you set up your system so that a new joiner to the organization can more easily know which channels they benefit from paying attention to and which channels they would have a duty to pay attention to in terms of their do this so you're doing your job?
So there's a lot of different answers to that. I'll kind of talk maybe through 2 or 3 of them. In our enterprise edition, you can sync LDAP groups, and that's probably what we find large enterprises doing, because when you're at the 20,000 person range of an organization, you don't want somebody to have an admin be individually responsible for going adding those people. So if you appear in certain groups, or if you have a certain title, it forces you into certain groups, those groups are then mapped to channels. So as an example, if you have let's say developing your title, you appear in these 10 different LDAP groups. If you're in those 10 different LDAP groups, you're automatically added to these 20 different channels. So at very large organizations, that's one of the best ways to do it. There's other ways to do it. As an example, even in our own community server, we have something called a welcome bot. So when you first join our community server, it says, welcome to Mattermost, blah, blah, blah. If you're a developer, click here. And when you click there, it actually goes and adds you to all the developer channels. If you're looking for support, it says click here. If you're interested in support, and it adds you to all the support channels. So those are kind of sort of 2 ways we find people doing it. There's another plugin out there, I think, somewhere that'll do recommendations in the sense that it's if you're in these channels, we think you should be in these channels as well. Would you like to join them? So those are really great ones too, where it recognizes that I'm in these 3 developer channels. Here's one where everyone who's in those channels in another channel as well. So those are kind of 3 ways, and depending on the size of your organization or what type of organization you are. As an example, for us, when we run our community server, we have a bunch of people coming from the outside, and so we find that's best to be taken care of via a welcome bot. So if you're a staff member, you actually get added to stuff via LDAP group. We provision you an account at the company. When you're in that company, when you join our public server, it automatically adds you to all these different groups. If you come in from our community, you actually have to signal to us, I'm interested in this type of information, and then it goes and adds you to those channels.
Okay.
So, other questions? Yeah, keep going.
Let's say you have an unprivileged, not unprivileged, but relatively low privileged user, just an individual contributor level, not an admin. Can they still write the plugins that you're talking about and maybe just have them apply to themselves? So for instance, if they wanted to say, okay, I'm joined in these channels, but I know I don't need to watch them and pay attention to them at a high level, I'm just going to have it snooze these channels from any time that my calendar is marked as focus on code block time.
Yep.
Is that fully supported?
It depends on how you write it. So our really powerful plugins, no, it requires a system administrator to upload them, so you'd have to have some sort of privileges. There's other things like adding webhooks or slash commands that may be lower privileged. But in general, in our system, to upload the more richer, powerful plugins, or to write a more richer, powerful plugin, you do have to be the elevated privilege, elevated user. So what we find a lot of people doing in that sense is they'll set up a test environment that mirrors their production. They'll get all the kinks worked out there, and then they'll migrate the code over, or the plugin over to their production system. So, Any other questions? How to reach me? At Corey Hulen on Twitter. My email is corey@hulen.com or just Corey at Mattermost, either one. Probably the best way to reach me, though, is I'm at Corey on our community server. If anyone wants to check out what Mattermost is or look at our community, like I said, there's about 6,000 of us that sit there. Community.mattermost.com. That's it. And I'll be up here answering more questions. People have questions. So thank you very much.